We're always talking about sales and things like that, but really what book writing is about, it's about impacting the world. It's about impacting people's lives. Whether that's entertainment, if you're writing fiction and you're just trying to bring them a little bit of joy, or where it's a book like yours where you're trying to help people live just a healthier, more balanced, more rewarding life. That's what it's about.
What would the world look like if people felt like they mattered? Welcome to the Lead with Love podcast, exploring what it means to lead with love in business and life. I'm your host, Jada Selner, and in this show, I'll share meaningful conversations to help you, the creative, the entrepreneur, the world changer, reach more people, go after your dreams, and serve your community with love. I appreciate you joining me. Now, let's get cozy and start today's episode. I'm curious. Do you want to write a book? If you want to learn the behind the scenes insights on how the publishing process works, you're in for a treat because today I talked to my literary agent, David Fugate, where he shares advice about what it takes to publish a book. And I want to share a little story. So during my sold out release party for She Builds, in Mill Valley at Club Avexia, a beautiful wellness space that also has this beautiful, cozy, modern, beautifully designed event space for gathering and sitting in cozy chairs and love seats. It was so beautiful. And my dear friend and client, Grace, the founder of the Hivery, actually hosted this event and really pulled in some amazing people. I had my support squad there, including my life coach and my therapist, my husband and my kid Zoe. It was just a really beautiful, beautiful celebration. And I don't know about you, but I have this fear. And so I don't throw events often because I have this fear that no one's going to come to my party. This party was full. It was vibrant, full of just creative, entrepreneurial people wanting to build in a sustainable way. So something that Grace asked towards the end of our conversation was, how many people want to write a book? And 75% of the people in the room raised their hands. And that made me realize so many of us have stories and messages inside us that we want to share. So I'm super excited to reveal what authors need to succeed when it comes to writing a book that impacts the world. And some of the things that we're going to talk about are the most challenging parts of the book publishing process for authors. I have definitely gone through that. David also shares the key characteristics an author needs to manage the book writing journey successfully. And he also shares tips and strategies for the launch phase of getting a book into as many hands as possible. And that's really the journey that I'm on. I'm on this slow burn, slow simmer, sustainable, spacious 18-month launch plan. So I plan to talk about She Builds for a really long time. I think sometimes people do this kind of crescendo 2-week book launch and hope they get New York Times bestseller status. And then they just drop it like it's hot, whether they get it or not. And for me, that wasn't the intention. I didn't want that type of external validation. Of course, I would happily receive it. But my intention is I just want this book to keep selling and to keep growing in a very organic, word of mouth way where I'm doing more in-person events for really cozy circles of women entrepreneurs and their allies. Something that's been so cool is I know so many men who are reading the book right now, and there's no shame or hiding about it. My husband is actually listening to the audiobook version right now, which is really cool. And I'm just in this space of fully receiving and allowing the love to come in because I did pour my heart into this book with this beautiful cover and the gold foil heart. And it's just so amazing that it's no longer in my head and it's no longer in my Google Docs. It's like in physical and audio form that people can consume and read and highlight and earmark pages. And I just want to hear about it, like how it's going to land when it's out in the wild. So it's super exciting that it's finally available and that you can get She Builds, the anti-hustle guide to grow your business and nourish your life at shebuilds.com. And if you're an Audible listener like me, head over to shebuilds.com/audible. And if you love this book, would you please take 5 minutes to leave a review? You can head over to shebuilds.com/review. Even if you just give it 5 stars, that is super helpful. But if you could write just what would you tell a friend? You know, how would you describe the book to a friend? That's all you need to write. Pretend like you're writing a quick text message to a friend, or find a text message. Maybe you already shared it with someone, copy and paste that and post that in the review. That would mean the world to me, because it is the most helpful thing you can do to inspire more people to read the book, is telling them how it helped you, how it impacted you, how it shifted any perspectives, or is just like the medicine that you needed to hear in this season. And I do believe that we're in this season of collective burnout. And I believe that anti-hustle is the antidote to burnout. So I'm going to be a huge advocate of this work, and I want it to get into as many hands as possible. So I'm excited for you to get to know my literary agent, David Fugate, who is the president and founder of LaunchBooks Literary Agency at launchbooks.com. He has represented a wide range of best-selling fiction and nonfiction projects that have generated in excess of $50 million for their authors. That is phenomenal. I am happy to be in this club and journey, and I hope I just get a little piece of that pie. That would be amazing. It means that I'm impacting more lives. So a little behind the scenes, well, not even behind the scenes, in the front of the scenes, David represents New York Times bestselling authors such as Andy Weir, the #1 New York Times bestselling author of The Martian, which was turned into the Golden Globe winning film starring Matt Damon and directed by Ridley Scott. Artemis and Project Hail Mary, currently in development to become a film starring Ryan Gosling. Hey girl. He also represents authors like Chris Gilbo, who is the author of the New York Times bestselling book, The $100 Startup, one of my favorite books that I read in my early entrepreneurial days. And he has also written Side Hustle and The Happiness of Pursuit. David also represents Vanessa Van Edwards, author of the Wall Street Journal bestseller Captivate and Cues, and Megan Devine. Her book is called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And David shares a really cool story that I will save for you to listen in the episode. But I have actually recommended her book to my mom. So just showing the power of word of mouth marketing is so valuable. And, you know, he represents me. So that's amazing too. So now let's get cozy with David. Hi, David.
Hi, Jada.
I'm super excited to have this conversation because for people who don't know, you are my literary agent and we are getting ready to based on when this conversation happens, the book could already be out. I'm not sure what the editorial timeline is, but it's just cool for us to have this conversation right when we just got an email from Harper Business that said, our printed copies will be in our hands in a few days, which is wild.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it. It's been a long time coming, but book publishing is slow, but it's always wonderful. The great thing about it is you get this amazing sort of tangible thing that you can hold in your hand and sort of see the summation of all that work. So I can't wait.
Yeah, and let's talk about that because our relationship has been a very long publishing timeline from meeting each other to actually getting this book out into the world. So we met in 2014 at Chris Gilbo's World Domination Summit. It was the first keynote I had ever delivered, which happened to be in front of 3,000 people.
Yeah, the conference was bigger then. That's right.
Yeah, I think that was the last year that it was 3,000. And then the following year, he went down to 1,000, which is still a lot of human beings in one auditorium and a lot of just dreamers, world changers. So I'm curious for you, like, what do you remember on your side? Because I just remember I delivered my first keynote. And I'm like, okay, I did it. Yay. And then you were right off stage and Chris had introduced me to you. So I was shocked, surprised, excited, but I'd love to kind of hear from your side because you got to see me deliver that keynote. And I don't know like what the conversation was of I need to meet this person or how did that all work out?
So, obviously I represent Chris Guillebeau as well. And I still remember the day that Chris called me and said, hey, I've got this idea. I think I'm going to try to get a bunch of people to come to Portland, and I'm going to have my own conference. And I thought, well, if anybody can do it, Chris can do it. He's just, he has that sort of energy. And so I'd been to every World Domination Summit, and I ended up attending every single one of them. And it's always been a great place for me to find authors. A lot of times he'll have people who are sort of in the same position that you were, which is you're giving your first big keynote. They're not a lot of, especially in the beginning, they weren't a lot of professional speakers. They weren't people who did this all the time. They were just people that he had come across who we thought were just interesting or had something really special to share. And so over the years, I found a lot of authors in that same exact way that I found you, right? You give a talk, and I was blown away by it. I thought it was fantastic. And, my first thought is, I'm a literary agent, so my first thought is, hey, let's talk about a book. Is there something there that the author would want to do to turn into a book? Whether it's this talk or whether it's something else, I could just tell the way that you connected with the audience, the way that they responded to your story. I just thought it was really powerful. And so, that was my, lucky that I represent Chris because I could say, hey, Chris, give me an introduction.
Yeah.
So it was very easy from that point of view. And I found a number of really amazing authors that way. Megan Devine is another author that I found exactly the same way. She gave this talk and everybody cried in the audience, and I was like, okay, this is someone who has something to share. And so it was a very similar kind of thing. And then, the second part of that, after I got to talk to you and to know you a little bit and to get even more sense of your story, I was convinced that you had a really great book in you. It ended up taking a little bit longer, but, that's okay. Book publishing is slow, and I'm patient, and I'm not qualified to do anything else. So I can wait,
Yeah.
So, it took a long time for us to get to this point, but that's not that unusual for me either. We'll sometimes find that when I get to meet a new prospective author, they're not always ready to do a book right away, whether it was the circumstances in their life or in where they're at with their work, how overcommitted they are to what they're already doing. Writing a book is a massive commitment, emotionally, time-wise. It's difficult. And so you really have to be ready to do that. And a lot of people, they're not ready right away. But, that's okay. I can wait.
Yeah, it's definitely a warm-up. And what I realized during that time in 2014, and you were so generous because you were taking me to meet with editors in Portland that week. And I was just like, pinch me moment. It just felt so inspiring. And also just to be able to share my story that was very vulnerable and also kind of blending, my own life, business, which I feel like this book is kind of really just an expanded version of that with a lot more experience running a business. But we ended up, like you said, sometimes people have other work on their plates. And so we decided like, Simple Green Smoothies needs its own recipe book. Like that needs to come first. I remember reaching out to you in 2018. So this was 2 years after I exited Simple Green Smoothies. And I was like, I'm ready. And you're like, all right, great. Send me a book proposal. And then I think, you didn't hear from me for like another, 2 years. Just, it's like, that's the dance, right? Because we're over here on this other side as authors, like, how do I do this? How do I make it good? What am I trying to say? What do I want to write about? And then I remember kind of getting back into writing the proposal in 2020, and I got really stuck. And instead of staying stuck on my own, I was trying to hire like all these other editors or people, coaches who could help me. I was like, why don't I just ask David? for help. And you were so helpful. It's like the part where I was stuck, which tends to be like the hardest part. I don't know. For me, I think it might be for everyone else. I just talked to another one of your authors and a good friend of mine, Charlie Gilkey, on his podcast. He was saying that overview, man, that like 1,500 words that's the hardest part to summarize, like what this book is, who it's for, why you, why now. Do you see that with most of your authors, that the overview and the book proposal is the most challenging part, or is it something else?
It varies from author to author. It's the most challenging bit of writing, certainly in the proposal, because, as you said, it's a combination of all those things, right? It's an introduction to the topic. You're explaining the need that this, the problem that this book is going to solve, why you're the correct person to write it, why editors should care about it, right? So it's part sales document, it's part information. Editors, nobody in book publishing that I know got into it because they thought it was a way to make money, right? They all got into it because they love books and ideas, and they like to learn new things, and they like to be part of solutions to problems that are new and interesting, and they like to be connected to those kind of people, right? So you're trying to communicate all this in such a short period of time. It's a tricky bit of writing, right? Because you don't want it to come across as salesy, yet you're also trying to make a business case for a book, because they want great ideas, but they also want ideas that are going to sell, because that's part of their job too. So yeah, it's a challenging bit of writing, but I also find that sometimes they need help constructing the book. They need help structuring it. What do I want to say? What is the flow of ideas? What is my unique hook? What's my approach here? Because sometimes you'll see evergreen kinds of topics where, let's say it's like personal finance, for instance, right? Every 4 or 5 years, there'll be a new big book in the personal finance space. The information has not changed probably in 50 years, but the difference is the audience that you're appealing to, the entry point, like how are you presenting the information, sort of what is the way that you get them in the door. And so authors need help with different kinds of things depending on what they're doing. So that overview is tricky to write, and kind of no matter who you are. But if you have a really good sense already of what you want to write and why you want to write it, it's a lot easier. But for some people, when I talk to them, I might really believe that they have a great book in them, but they haven't figured out the book yet. They haven't quite figured out what it's going to be. And that can be harder in some circumstances, figuring out, the title and subtitle and what is the flow of ideas and how are we approaching this. That's tricky too.
Yeah.
It's not, books are so funny because people see, that seems so obvious. That's like writing a hit pop song. It seems obvious after.
Yes.
Right? It seems like anybody could do it after. But, if I could just get back the time in my life that I've spent thinking of titles and subtitles, I'd be 29 again.
Right.
It's sort of like,
oh my goodness. My Google Doc of subtitles.
It's
so
insane.
Many. And the TOC variations, the table of contents. And I think that is definitely why I struggled with the overview, because there were so many books I could have possibly gone, or so many different directions. And it's like, how do I write the book that I want to spend time with versus the book that I think I should write, or the book that people are expecting from me? It's like finding that sweet spot of something that the marketplace actually wants to read and consume, is interested in, but also it's got to take my interest for the next couple of years, because I'm going to be reading it, writing it, editing it, recording it, all of the things. And
marketing it, selling it. No, it's, and it has to be, and the other thing, and I know I had to sort of talk to you about this at one point, is you also want to be careful. You can't fit everything that you know into one book. Yeah. And I run into this with authors all the time, where they have all this knowledge and all this life experience and all these things that they've done and that they want to share with people, but you can't fit all that in one book. you know, so you have to sort of have to figure out the right size container for this particular idea. And, probably that means that over your life, you'll write multiple books, because all of you can't be in one book. It's just, there's not enough space.
Yeah. There's a huge overflow. And something that I ended up doing was actually writing over 30,000 words in a online writing retreat in 2020 to kind of help me get to the, what is the soul of this book? What wants to come out of me? And that really helped me to see, okay, there's some words here and it's kind of moving in this direction. And then I could build, I played with a TOC that I could write from, and I was able to fill in holes in that, because also in a table of contents, you might have an idea for a chapter and then it falls apart on the page. And you're like, I don't even know what I'm trying to say.
Right. Well, and your process is different from other authors. I mean, there's lots of different ways to get there, right? I remember you did a lot of writing to figure out what you wanted to write. You were sort of feeling your way through it, until you got to the point of, oh, this is the part that feels really good and sort of true and what I want to say. Not all authors do that. I have authors who they'll plan everything out ahead of time and write to the plan, essentially.
Right.
But it's kind of one of the great things about publishing is there are so many different ways to go about it. It is not a science. I don't want to sort of overdo it and say, oh, it's art. But it really is. It can sort of apply itself to each kind of personality, each kind of approach. They can all work.
Yeah.
So you just have to find what works for you.
Exactly. I was thinking the same thing. It's an art and then a craft. Those two blend together.
So and a whole lot of work.
Yeah, so much work. How I defined the book publishing process from concept to completion is that it is not a sprint or a marathon. It is a triathlon. Like you think okay, you're done with that swimming. Now you're going to go bike riding and now you're going to run. Like it's, you think you're done. Like, okay, I can rest. I'm not doing that anymore. And then it's on to the next thing. It's like you're writing and then you're editing and then you're marketing and putting it out into the world. And I'm in the running stage of like, really
you're
tired.
Still right. You're like at mile, 16 where you're like, oh my gosh, I've been running so far. You still have like 10 miles to go. No, it's a really good analogy because it's a long process. It's a slow process, but there's a lot to be done at each stage, and it's good to I find that the authors who sort of manage it the best are good about when they complete one phase, shutting it off for a bit and then coming back to it and sort of being a little bit rejuvenated. Yeah, it's not easy because it is slow. I mean, that is the one thing about publishing that drives me completely bonkers still is how long everything takes.
I used to be bummed about it too, of like, if I have the idea now, I want to get it out into the world because this might not be relevant 2 or 3 years from now. But something that I have appreciated about the slow process is that you do get to deepen your craft, your artistry, and also just the thinking and the incubating that it all takes as well. There's times where you're like, I should be writing because we thought this book would come out in May. And I was like, I'm not there yet. But you remember how excited I was. I was like, I can deliver this in 3 months, 6 months, no problem. And you were like, hold on, Jada. Like, let's make sure you have a life. You're actually living and embodying the message in this book. It's just, we get so excited because we want our message out there, but it also takes time and thoughts and ideas have to simmer too.
Yeah, and there's a couple things there, in terms of, your writing schedule. I find that authors always think in best case scenario situation, and they don't do it intentionally. They just do it. They say, okay, I can write X many words a day. And that one week, I remember I did all this, and they sort of project based on that. And you're like, no, you don't understand. You're not going to have your best week every week for 3 consecutive months in terms of writing. It's not going to happen. Life stuff is going to come up. Things with your business are going to come up. You might catch a cold. There's going to be things that slow you down. And so
all those things happened.
Right. So whenever I talk to authors about scheduling, I'm always like, put in more time than you think you need. If you feel like you're going to write to that schedule, try to write to that schedule, but let's not tell the publisher that.
Yeah.
Let's make sure you have enough time so that when things go wrong, because it's not if something goes, like when, that you can adjust. Because the last thing that you want when you're trying to do something as difficult as a big book is to be behind the 8 ball from a timing point of view right away. Right? You don't want to put yourself under immediate time pressure. Some authors, I write better on. No, you don't.
Yeah, nope, it's not true.
It's too stressful, and it's stress over an extended period of time, and it's a big task, and you sort of need to break it down and do it that way. So, but that's the schedule thing. But what you were talking about before in terms of the length of time, I will say the one good thing about how long it takes to get a book out is that it forces us to think in terms of topics and approaches to content that are going to last longer. They're not going to be news. They're not going to be something that's like good now, but not in 6 months. You sort of have to adjust your thinking to say, okay, if it's not going to come out for 18 to 24 months, and I want it to last for years after that, how do I approach that? How do I write that? And so you have to write in a way that makes your book, I don't want to say better, but certainly longer lasting. It is a benefit. It just hurts anyway.
It does. It hurts. You're like, I want the money. I want the payments closer together. I want all the things. But yeah, I was writing off the confidence of, I wrote 30,000 words in 3 days, David. Like, I'm amazing. But what happened, that's like doing a sprint, right? And then you're completely exhausted. You need to recover from that. So I didn't really get any like deep writing. That was in April. I think that I did that in 2020. Then we kind of moved into the book proposal, finalizing that in November, and then getting the deal with Harper Business in December. And then I didn't really get into a true writing rhythm until like the spring of 2021. And then I didn't really do extensive writing until like the end of September 2021. Like there was a lot of hemming and hawing and all the things. And then you get sick because you are kind of the pressure cooker of needing to write, of like, now the deadline's a month away, not like 6 months or 9 months. So,
and those 30,000 words that you wrote initially, it's not like you just use those, right?
Yeah, nope, I didn't.
It's not how that goes, right? I mean, it's always like, I think people who aren't really familiar with the process of really writing a book, they don't understand writing is rewriting. You don't just sit down and write it and that's it. That's not even close to it. That first part of writing, it's almost like you're a sculptor, but you have to build the block of stone first. That's like your first pass. And then you have to start chipping away to get to the sculpture that's underneath, right? It's like poor sculptors had to build the rock. Writers have to, they have to build that part of it first and then go back and rewrite until happy with it, which is
so many revisions. And I thought I didn't like editing, but I did fall in love with the editing process because that was the time where you could make the block, refine it and ask questions. And it was easier to move things around because you actually had something to work with. Where when you're just in idea land, it's just everything's invisible and there's no pieces to move around and you're just kind of, off in space.
And that's why, that's also, even in the proposal stage, I often will have authors when they're thinking about a book, which is, I did the same thing with you. I say, okay, get me a proposal. Or if you can't get me a proposal, get me the title, the subtitle, and the chapter titles. Just get me that, because even that forces you to organize your thoughts in a really significant way in terms of, what do I want to say? What is the flow of ideas? What am I calling it? All those things are, when it's just in your head, you're doing 5% of that.
Yeah.
Like that. I think as human beings, we sort of like, it would do this and this and this. But you don't have to go through all the really hard parts of organizing it and going through it, right? And I have to say, I think you were wonderful during the editing phase of the book because, you said you fell in love with it. A lot of authors never fall in love with that stage. It is the hardest part of writing by far. I can't remember exactly who said it. I'm sure lots of people have, but you sort of write the first draft with your heart, and then the revisions after that are like, moving heavy rocks up a hill. Sometimes. It's not easy.
Yeah. And I did end up hiring an editor to collaborate with outside of Harper Business, because I have a lot of runway. So I write a lot of words and it's like, I need to cut these down. And so that was really helpful for me to have someone on the outside kind of looking at my dirty laundry and like, okay, here's some clean clothes over here and let's get rid of this and all of those pieces, because it's a lot to sit with your own work. So to have someone that was so collaborative and like in the weeds with me made the process really fun. And I realized that I'm a very collaborative creative. So I like playing with other people as I'm creating things. I had my life coach kind of helping me from the emotional support. Like you said, like it's emotional. Then I had the outside editor who was kind of like the logistical in the weeds with me. So that was really helpful for me to kind of bounce ideas and trim the excess and ask me different questions that I might not have thought of. And then also having my developmental editor at Harper Business, Wendy, it was just helpful to have like different people looking at things in different angles. And we all think so differently, so it's like, and that cohesiveness, like everyone coming together and bringing something to the tables. That's what made it so fun for me. I think if I was all alone, because I did try that and it wasn't fun and it didn't work. So I think that's probably why I fell in love with it, because I didn't feel alone in the weeds of my manuscript.
It's an interesting process that you had, which is different from what a lot of authors do. Most of the books that I've represented over the last 30 years would be, there's typically 3 people involved, right? It's the author, the editor, and then me. That's it on the great majority of them. And it's funny, people outside publishing are like, how did this error get through into this book? And you're like, this was not a team of 100 people.
Yeah.
Yes, we had a copy editor, but realistically, it's, most of these books are a collaborative effort. It's, 95% the author, and then 5% developmental editor, and an 1/8% is the agent, sort of giving their thoughts and kind of helping along. But your process was much more collaborative than that. And I think it's what works for you personally. And I think it really helped you kind of engage more deeply with the book.
Yeah.
And I think it was wise because, like you said, people have different experiences. And I find that, you have to be careful because we all make assumptions without doing it intentionally. And we expect, we think that people will, if I say this, people will understand that. And it doesn't always work that way, right?
Yeah. Doing that, though, I did have double work because it's like I had deadlines with my collaborative editor, and then I had deadlines with Harper Business editors. So it's like I had to make the deadlines for Harper, but then I had to make them 2 weeks earlier to do the back and forth dance. So I know now more for the future. I hope that I have the privilege to write more books because it was just such a really fun process, and I learned so much about myself and grew so much. I could just talk to you about writing and all the book stuff, and I want to continue, but I do want to ask you a question that I love to ask all my guests is, what does leading with love mean to you? And how do you put love into practice in your body of work and what you do? As you said, this is the only work that you can do. So I'm just curious what you're qualified for. I would just love to hear from your words what comes up for you when I ask that question.
It's an interesting question. I don't know that I probably wouldn't phrase it that way naturally. I wouldn't say, here's how I lead with love. But what I do feel is a deep sense of responsibility, right? Mm-hmm. So when I work with authors, I really feel that my job is to try to help them get the most that they possibly can out of their efforts in writing. In terms of professionally, making sure that they get a good deal, make sure they're treated properly by the publisher. Personally, in terms of how they feel about their work, I want authors that I work with to be proud of what they've done. I don't want them to get involved in projects or to take deals just because, there's money involved. I want them to really feel good about it, so that however the sales go on a book, they can look at it and say, I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I could share that. I'm happy with what I did there. So I guess for me, I feel just sort of a very deep sense of responsibility to kind of take care of the people that I work with and try to just help them get the best out of it. So, my job is to be an advocate, to work on behalf of the authors I work with, to just try to make sure that it's a positive experience because it is difficult, takes a long time, takes a lot of effort. And, I want to be part of cool, powerful, interesting, thoughtful things come out into the world. It's really what I love about publishing is that books can change the world. And that's kind of I don't want to sort of overblow that statement, but they can impact the way people talk to each other, the things that they think about. Even if they're sort of a how-to book, it can help people accomplish things in their lives that they want to do, And so I guess that's how I think about it more than anything else.
Being able to be in this partnership relationship with you, I definitely think that you lead with love in how you partner with your authors. I feel you are an advocate. You totally take a stand and you're so compassionate with your emails. I just imagine that all your authors, especially first-time authors, just ask you the same questions over and over again. I'm like, do you have a template, a Google Doc response? Because I'm sure it's the same. Because with one of my friends, it's like, oh my goodness, we all have the same questions just over and over and over again. I'm curious, you're just so patient and you are so detail oriented in the way that you respond and you're willing to hop on quick phone calls. And I also just feel like you're also super honest and authentic. You won't take a project on if it's not the right fit for you. So I just want to reflect back that I'm like, you are totally leading with love and how you show up in your work. And I feel that compassion, that patience. And it just feels like we're never doing anything wrong. Like it's like you don't make anyone feel like they're doing anything wrong. You just try to help people come up with the truest, best version of themselves and their work. And that's why I felt really called to work with you on this book, because I was in this tender transition between, Simple Green Smoothies and then being a business mentor and coach, and nonfiction prescriptive business book is so different than a recipe book. And I just felt like it was in such good hands working with you in that way.
Well, I'm glad. That's my hope, right? And I mean, you mentioned sort of people asking the same questions. I really don't mind. I love publishing as a business. I find that the people that work in it are generally good people, and they all really want positive things. It's not cutthroat. It's like if someone says, hey, we're going to do X, you can sort of take them at their word that they're going to do that. And if they don't do it, they'll come to you and explain why they weren't able to do it, and they'll apologize, and they'll try to figure it out. And so I love the industry. I also recognize that it's kind of impenetrable from the outside. It seems intuitive, but it's not. So it seems like, oh, it should work this way. Well, no, it doesn't work that way at all. And so I don't mind explaining how it works, because once you understand why a certain process happens the way it does, it makes sense, And so I actually enjoy talking about books. I enjoy talking about publishing. I'm happy to do it. So whenever authors ask me those questions, I have not put together a Google Doc. I did write a book. I did do the Unconventional Guide to Book Publishing. And the funny thing is that came about because I actually spoke at the first WDS. Chris basically said, turns out I am having it and you're talking. I'm like, okay, I'll come and do something, right? So, and after I gave it, he said, I got a good response back. People really liked it. Why don't you put that together and we'll just make a little book out of it? And I'm like, well, I don't have time to write a book. I'm like, I know how much work it is. I'm not going to pretend that I'm an author. I'm happy helping other people do that. He's like, no. He's like, it'll be easy. It's 10,000 words. Like, you can't say anything about publishing in 10,000 words.
Yeah.
No way, right? So he talked me into it, and it ended up being about 50,000 words. So he became both my client and my publisher.
I love it.
Because, he published it through his site when he was doing all these unconventional guides at the time. And so, yeah, I have that book out, which also really helped me. I mean, it helped sort of even deepen my empathy for writers in terms of understanding what they go through. I would work all day, and then at night I would sort of sit down and try to make way on my book. And I would come back sometimes the next day or a couple of days later, and I would read something that I wrote. I'm like, that is not even English. That is like, this makes no sense. Did I have a medical incident while I was trying to write this? Like, what is this about? But yeah, so I ended up really enjoying it, and it really did give me a good sense of how hard it is. I really enjoy publishing. I joke with people sometimes that it's the only thing I'm qualified to do, but it's also really the only thing I want to do. I really do like it.
Yeah. And so people can still get access to that book, right?
I sell it on my site. If you go to launchbooks.com, you can click and buy it. I keep thinking that I'm going to update it, right? So I wrote the book, and it was originally like around 2014 when I wrote it. The shocking thing is how much of it remains exactly the same. Everything is still applicable. It's crazy. It's quite crazy. The one thing I really want to add is a chapter or two on fiction. Up until that point, I only represented nonfiction. And so that's what I focused the book on. And then within a year or two after that, I started doing fiction as well. And, I always get questions about fiction too from authors. And so at some point I'll update it to include that.
Are there certain type of fiction books that you are more drawn to represent?
Yeah, I used to joke back in the day that people asked for a shorthand. I was like, I represent geeks. That was sort of like, when I started out, that's kind of what I did. I translated from geek into sort of like normal person language, right? I used to work with a lot of authors from Wired Magazine and places like that, and sort of more sort of tech-oriented stuff. When it comes to nonfiction, I do a tremendously broad range of projects, kind of whatever I find personally interesting. So sometimes I'll say that the nonfiction books that I represent are almost a backwards biography of me, because they tell you what I think is interesting, what I care about, what I think is worth spending time on. So that's on the nonfiction side. On the fiction side, I used to, since I do all this nonfiction that requires a lot of deep thought, like extended thought, trying to work things out. It's sometimes quite serious depending on the book. I've always read fiction just because I love to read, and almost like a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
Just for fun, I would read fiction, just silly fiction. And a lot of times it'd be science fiction. And I remember the way I got into representing fiction was I had read World War Z by Max Brooks, the silly sort of zombie novel.
Yeah,
and I liked it.
My husband's
read fun.
that one. Yeah.
Right. It was fun. And so I'm like, okay, what else is out there in this vein, right? This is when the zombie thing was kind of brand new. And I saw that there was this book called X Heroes that got really great reviews. And it was zombies versus superheroes. And I just thought, okay, that's absurd. I have to check it out. And the reviews were really good. The reviews were great. So I read it and really loved it and enjoyed it. It's by this author named Peter Kleins. And as an agent, I look at, okay, who published this? And it was what's called Permuted Press. I'm like, okay, that's made up. Authors of self-published books will very often invent a press name, right? So that it sounds more serious. And so I thought that's made up. So I'm like, I'm going to reach out to this author and see what he thinks. It turns out it wasn't made up. It was actually a small digital press, I think that was out of Texas or something. But I convinced the author first and then the publisher to say, why don't you let me see if I can sell this to a bigger house? I really love this, and ended up selling it to Random House. I think it was a 4-book deal, and he ended up doing, I think, 5 or 6 books in the series. And it was just a lot of fun because I already read that stuff for fun anyway. And then I got to also represent it. I thought, I'll do more of this, And so most of my fiction sort of falls into science fiction and its various subgenres. I also do some fantasy. It's pretty limited. I don't go too wide in terms of my fiction.
And then you mentioned that the nonfiction is kind of a backlog biography. So what are those things that you are most interested in the nonfiction space?
It's going to be a pretty broad range of stuff. And I've represented everything from, I did a book called I Am Not Your Slave, which was about a woman in Africa who had been abducted and taken to the Middle East and actually forced into slavery, modern day slavery. And you read a story like that, and how can you not be fascinated? How can you not be compelled to try to help someone like that? And so I'll do a book like that. I'll do books on investing. I've done a ton of books on entrepreneurship and sort of the cornerstone or where they crossroads of entrepreneurship and personal development. I'll end up doing a lot of stuff. I've done books on grief, on politics. I've done various technical titles. I've done sort of titles about bizarre animals. I've done titles about forestry. I've done
it's a wide range, but you'll know when something's not interesting to you too, right? It's like, that's not.
Yeah, it takes 2 seconds. Any successful agent will get query letters emailed to them every day, and I get between 10 and 15 a day, between 3,500 and 4,000 a year.
Wow.
Right? And I used to respond to every single one of them. My thought process for the last 20 years was, if someone's going to take the time to write to me, I'm going to take the time to respond to them. I'm actually now no longer able to do that just because of how many come in and how busy I am with my existing clients. My current clients always have to come first before new things, right? So very often, late afternoon or at night, I'll sit down and go through the query letters, and I can tell within a sentence most of the time if it's going to be a fit for me. If it's something I'm interested in. It doesn't take very long, half a page, I can already tell. And it's such a simple test. Sometimes I call it the ooh test. Do I go, ooh, that's interesting. I want to know more about that. And it's a very personal test only to me. I don't posit myself as the last stop for anybody. Like, just because I don't think something is worth representing doesn't mean it's not sellable. Doesn't mean it's not going to be a good book. It just means it's not personally interesting to me. I'm only one perspective. So I try to keep that in my memory. But so I can tell pretty much right away, especially with nonfiction, it's typically so conceptual that you can tell right away. But, I did a book called Dads for Daughters, which is sort of about how fathers can help participate more powerfully in making the world a better place for their daughters. Okay, I have a 15-year-old daughter. So obviously the appeal there is very direct for me. I'm like, okay, I want to help this come out into the world, and so that's what I did. So it really just comes down to what I find interesting. With nonfiction, it really comes down to publishers sort of look at it as like right topic, right author, right platform, right? They're looking for like these legs to try to figure out, does it sort of meet all of the things we're looking for? But I always start just with is it interesting to me? And then if it's interesting to me, we can go to the next step and sort of see, will someone buy it? Has it been done already? Those kinds of questions. If it has been kind of, the topic is an evergreen topic, what are we doing that's new and that's additive? Because you don't want to just write a book that's already been written. You want to create something new.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of sort of personal interest and preference, and then sort of just industry knowledge built up over 30 years of being in books.
Yeah. And you don't necessarily even follow trends, right? Because sometimes the book publishing world can kind of be like, we're looking for books about this. Or do you jump on that bandwagon? Yeah.
I don't. Every about 3 or 4 years, I learn the lesson of taking on something because I think it will sell and be popular rather than it because of something that I really love. And because most of the time what you find when you're trying to do stuff for that reason, it doesn't work out the way you think it will. Following trends is tough because there's a 2-year delay in book publishing, right? So is the current trend, is that going to be popular in 2 years? In most cases, it's not going to, right?
Yeah.
And usually the people that start the trends, that have the first book that wasn't trendy, that became a trend, they're the ones who do really well. And then you get all these follow-along books that don't do nearly as well.
Right. Yeah. And that's very love over metrics to say, to like not take on something just because you think it will sell, but to do it because you're actually genuinely interested in representing it and being an advocate for that.
Yeah. And I always try to think of it from the standpoint of, if it fails, am I still going to be happy that I did it? Right. That's how I try to think about it a lot of times. Because I don't. One of the things I love about being an agent is that I get a commission. I get a percentage of whatever the author gets. And the reason I like that is because if the author succeeds and I can help be part of that, then I succeed. If the author fails, I fail. Right? We're in it together. So it's not a question of, it's not like an attorney where, hey, I still get paid anyway.
Yeah.
I worked X number of hours. You still owe me this money, even though your project failed. That's not how being an agent works, right? It has to work. I have to make sure that the author gets paid and hopefully that the book sells well. And, we all have limited control over how those things ultimately go. There's a little bit of magic, in publishing, but I love that it's set up that way. I want to do it because I believe in it. And if it fails, at least I still believe in it. I still like it. I'm still glad that I did it.
And enjoying the process of noodling on the positioning and how to represent it and all of that. So
yeah, all that stuff is fun and painful.
Yes, it is.
It's hard, but when you figure it out, it's a great feeling.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the publishing industry is mysterious, hard to get into. Would you say that inside your book that would give people clues on how to approach the industry if they're interested in becoming a traditionally published author? Or what, like, one thing that you would tell someone who's like, I would like to explore, like getting in the door? What do they do?
Yeah, that's why I wrote that book. I sort of describe it as Publishing 101, right? It's meant to answer all of the most basic questions about how do things work? Why is this way? How do I go about doing this? So like if people want to figure out how do I go about contacting agents, I have a whole chapter on that. Like I have a chapter on like what should you look for in contracts? I have chapters on how do I write a book proposal? All of that stuff, I try to cover the absolute basics so that sort of pitch it as like, look, after you read this book, you're not going to know everything about publishing, but you're going to know more than about 99% of humanity about publishing because it is a little bit, it's not like secret society or anything, but that information just isn't out there easily and readily. That was why I wrote the book. That was the whole intent of it, to try to make things a little bit easier for authors. So when I talk at WDS or when I do things like that, I don't do a lot of speaking, but my goal is always to try to save people time and life effort, right? Like if I can save them 6 months of their life that they would have wasted trying to find an agent in some inefficient or unusual way, I figure that's a pretty great benefit to them. So that's sort of how I go about thinking about that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's the goal of the book. I'm happy with it. I feel like it answers a lot of those questions. There's still always more to learn. But,
yeah. I mean, I read through it. I feel like I might have read through it twice back in 2014 when I was like stuck with the book proposal. Like, what does David say? What does he want me to know?
Well, at that point, you could have just called me.
Yeah. Well, I finally did. I was like, this is trying to like hire all these other people to help me get to the answers. Let me just go directly to the expert. But, it's also, we want to try to like do our homework and come back and like, hey, I did my side of the job. Can we talk a little bit about rejection? for people who are putting themselves out there, making pitches to agents or trying to get a traditionally published book deal, like any words of wisdom on how to navigate that for authors that are trying to get in through the traditional publishing path?
I would generally tell people, contact a lot of agents. If you're looking to get an agent, contact a lot of them. There's absolutely nothing wrong with 12 people wanting to represent you. It probably won't happen, but I'll sometimes have authors will send me, I'm only contacting you. I think you're the exact agent that I want to work with on this book. And while I'm flattered to hear that, I also think it's a bad idea. I wouldn't do that if I were an author. You want to reach out to a lot of people because there's going to be a high percentage that the passes are going to happen for so many different reasons. They're too busy to look at something new right now. It's not the right topic for them. They saw a book that was kind of like that didn't sell well. They, tried a book like that at one point and it didn't quite work out. Or there's just a million reasons why they could be a pass. And so you really want to get it in front of a lot of people, 50, 60, 70 people. Now, a lot of my clients nowadays come through referrals and direct contact. So like you spoke and I came up and said hi. Well, then you don't need to contact 50 agents. But if you're starting from scratch, someone who's looking to get into it, you wouldn't contact a lot of people. And the best way to do that, there's a website called publishersmarketplace.com. It's the sort of key industry website for book publishing in the U.S. And it has deal postings from every agent that's actively working, and you can go through and look at deals, and they break it down by like 30 different categories, fiction and nonfiction. And so if you want to do a book on parenting, you can look at all the parenting deals that have been done for the last 10 years. They're all going to be listed with description of the book. Sometimes they include a little rough deal ballpark number in terms of maybe how much money they got, but it'll include the editor who acquired it, the agent who sold it, and it'll have contact info for all those people. So it's really easy to go through just in an afternoon and get together a list of 40, 50 agents who are actually selling books in the area that you're writing that you can then pitch your book to. And it just makes it so much easier than it ever really has been in the past. It's a great site. I get no kickbacks from them. I pay them $25 a month as well. But authors really only probably need it for a month or two.
Yeah.
So for $50, you can have access to every agent in the U.S. in terms of what books they've sold and how much they sold them for and what areas they work in most prominently. I mean, it's such an amazing resource. In terms of getting the passes and getting the no's, it's just part of the process. Don't take it personally. It's almost never personal. I mean, I can tell you that having passed on lots of things over the years. And, realize, too, that agents go through this, too. I sometimes tell people I get told no professionally. Like, even books I've sold that went on to become New York Times bestsellers, at least 75% of the publishers I pitched went, we don't think so. We like it, but we don't want to buy it. As an agent, that drives me insane. I'm like, how do you not see that this is amazing? Are you kidding me? And every once in a while I get to go back and go, remember that thing?
Yeah.
You're doing pretty well, right? I mean, Megan Devine's book is a great example, right? Her book's called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. It's a book about dealing with grief in our society, which doesn't really do very well with grief. Our culture doesn't understand how to do that. And I was blown away by Megan's message. And I went out and I tried to sell this book, and I kept being told, nope. I don't know how many no's we racked up, at least 30 or 35 passes from publishers.
Wow.
And they were all saying nonfiction books about grief don't sell. That's what they were saying. They wanted her to do a memoir. They wanted it to be like The Year of Magical Thinking, right? Publishers just kept saying, nope. Now the book came out, Sounds True bought it and published it, and it sold 300,000 copies. So if I would tell people, if people are telling you no, it doesn't mean you're wrong.
Yeah.
It just means they don't understand it yet. Keep trying.
It's so inspiring. And I found her on Instagram and shared her book with my mom and my bonus dad, my 16-year-old brother passing away in 2019. And people need books around grief and being able to connect in that way. For you and for Megan, how did you not stop with 35 no's? Is there a point where you're like, I guess, it just, no, it's not. Like, how did you go? Sometimes
you get to a point where you realize it's just not going to work. And it's never a fixed number for me. It's really a question of what kind of feedback am I getting? What is the interest like? If they're all passing for a specific reason and it's consistent, and you can sort of then sometimes realize, okay, the market changed or we missed it, or there's something that's not there that we didn't hit. And that's just a possibility. And so sometimes not every book that I pitch sells, as much pain as it causes me and anguish. But yeah, I mean, I think my record was, I think I had 62 passes on one book that I sold. And it took me 9 months of just constant pitching to get those 62 passes before somebody bought it. And the book is still out there and selling. That's not the right business model. You don't really want to.
Right.
Hey, we're going to take 9 months and get 62 passes. That's my plan. I like the ones where I pitch it on a Thursday and then, Tuesday, I've got the first offer. Those are the ones that are fun, right?
Yeah.
But, they're not all like that. So, and again, it's a question of if it's an idea that I believe in, and Megan's was certainly that. I really felt it. I really felt people need this, is essentially what I thought. And Sounds True has done a fantastic job with the book. They've done an amazing job with it. And, it's the kind of book that, like you did, people will gift 6, 8, 10 copies to people that they know who have had someone who's gone through this sort of out of time loss, right? This unexpected loss, because it's just so wrenching, so difficult to deal with. And that's just one example. I've had so many books like that over my career where people didn't get it, or they thought it wouldn't work, or they had all these reasons why it wasn't going to work, and then it did. It's just an amazing feeling, to be part of something like that ends up happening. I mean, I've also had times where I absolutely loved books and they didn't sell for whatever reason, and that's painful. There's an element of magic to publishing. It's still a word of mouth kind of business. When it comes out, the book has to hook into something that people just get excited about and love, and they have to tell other people about.
Yeah. And
we try to market books. It's like I sometimes tell authors, like, here's the thing. You have to imagine that you're pushing a giant rock up a hill, right? That's your marketing, right? You're just keep going. And eventually the idea is you get to the top of the hill and then it just starts rolling on its own and you're kind of done. Problem is you don't know where the top of the hill is.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can't see it.
Well, it's interesting because as I'm looking at, She Builds Pub Day, I am looking, I have strategies that I'm putting in place for kind of the first few weeks, but I'm really looking at it as a year to 18-month long campaign for me. Like my intention is to keep it top of mind, to get that word of mouth marketing constantly going, because I have tons of ideas that no way can me and my team execute, in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. So I'm going to do my best of what I have capacity for, and then honor, my mental energy, my physical energy of like, I can't do more right now. So this is what it is for now. Anything that I don't get to now, I'm going to spread that out over the next year and kind of look at a longer, sustainable way of marketing a book, because a lot of times people have that hockey stick moment. And it's not always in the first couple of weeks. Obviously, everyone's like betting and hoping that will happen. But I, to put all that effort, time, and energy into writing, to just give it like a 2-week celebration and then all right, on to the next project. Like it just feels...
and you're taking that whole triathlon analogy seriously.
Yeah. I'm hoping
you're going for the long haul.
I'm hoping this next, like after the book comes out, like, the running, that then I'm on the lazy river, so I'm just kind of like making little steps along the way and just floating along of like, oh, let me take a little break and step off the stairs and get on a slide right here. All right, let me get back in the river and just let it carry me. So I'm kind of looking at it from that perspective, but it feels like there's this crescendo of pressure for those first few weeks for sure. So I'm definitely in that.
And that's normal. A lot of times the way that publishers think about it is not just that it's a sort of 2-week celebration or like a quick hit and then they move on. You're almost a lot of times trying to establish the book at a certain sales level, right? And then hoping that it doesn't tail off very quickly, right? So you're trying to get it a lot of attention around Pub Week and in the sort of 4 to 6 weeks thereafter. And then a lot of times you're sort of trying to establish the kind of velocity or the momentum for the book that it can then hopefully maintain in part on its own because people are reading it and responding to it and sharing it and enjoying it and getting a lot out of it. So for some people, it's about trying to make a bestseller list or something. But I find these days that that's sort of an empty endeavor to try to
Yeah.
pursue. The lists don't have, when I started, I started in publishing way back when, but for many years in publishing when I started, if you made the New York Times bestseller list, you then would sell a lot of books after that. It had a very powerful sort of like carry-on effect where because you were on the New York Times list, you then sold more books because everybody followed it. Well, that's not how it goes anymore. It's not like that now.
I didn't think of that. It's so true. You would like read that in the newspaper, right?
Right. And you would say, oh, well, this book's a New York Times bestseller. Okay, well, I'll check it out, But now people don't follow that as close. It doesn't have the same impact. It might have some, but not nearly what it used to have. Nowadays, you're much better off, instead of trying to hit a list, you're much better off just, finding the communities that are going to appeal, they're going to have the sort of most desire for your book, and then going on podcasts and doing guest posts and being sort of present in those spaces so that people become just aware that the book exists. And if you've crafted the messaging correctly, they might want to pick it up, right? So I'll sometimes tell authors, like, people need to hear about your book like 3 times before they're going to buy it.
It's so true. Every time when I recommend a book to someone, they're like, you're the second person that just said that in the week, and it's that third time where you're like, all right, universe, okay, I'm going to put it in the cart and order it.
It appears I have no choice but to read this book.
Yes. I love that. That gives me just like, I can exhale because that's my intention is, I want to I did a podcast tour. I booked over 20 podcasts. And I want to maintain that for a whole other year to keep showing up and being in the spaces where my people are. And that feels very fun to me. So as we wrap up, is there any, first, selfishly, can I ask for myself, She Builds, the Anti-Hustle Guide to Grow Your Business and Nourish Your Life is available for pre-order or order whenever you are listening to this at shebuilds.com. But any words of wisdom for me as my lit agent, getting ready for pub day, of just anything that I should be thinking or doing, or just anything that I should know when I'm almost on the other side?
Jada, you're doing amazing. You've been so intentional throughout the entire process. You know what you're doing. You've brought in excellent people to work with you. You have a great plan. You have a team that you work with. You're doing great. You're going to be fine. I mean, what I would say is just enjoy it, right? I know sometimes authors, during the promotional phase of their book, they sometimes almost can kind of get sick of themselves because they're talking about their book so much, and sometimes they're forced to do it in sound bites and things like that, and it can be a little bit tiring. But, I would just say before it comes out, do a mental reset and just realize this is the first time that a lot of people will ever hear about this, right? Mm-hmm. Think about it from that standpoint. Someone new some of these people will have never even heard of you before. You might be on a podcast and they may not have heard of you or your work or know anything about it. And you're getting to introduce these people to a lot of this amazing stuff that you're bringing to the table that, is going to impact their lives. And so I would just say enjoy the process. Think about it as sharing, and you're going to do great. Yeah, you're already well on track.
Thank you. And that's something I definitely share a lot about, even in the book, is to enjoy the process and like really trusting yourself and trusting the process. And so that's just great. And this conversation has been a breath of fresh air for me. And I'm sure for many listeners, whether they're writing their first book, thinking about it, or on to their next. It's been such a joy just learning from you about the book publishing process. And I love how much you love it and love to share and teach about it. So I'm just so thankful to have you in my life and to be an advocate for She Builds. And I hope many more books. Let's people buy She Builds so I can write more books, because that's what I would really love to do, to just be like a career author and do more of this work, because I have enjoyed the process. Is there anything that you would like to say before we wrap up?
No, thank you for having me on. I'm so excited. I can't wait to finally, I'm going to have the book in hand next week, it looks like. So that's exciting. No, I can't wait for you to be able to share your work with people, for them to be able to sort of hold it in their hand, and for it to have an impact. We're always talking about sales and things like that, but really what book writing is about, it's about impacting the world. It's about impacting people's lives, whether that's entertainment if you're writing fiction and you're just trying to bring them a little bit of joy, or where it's a book like yours where you're trying to help people live just a healthier, more balanced, more rewarding life. That's what it's about. And so that's what I hope for. Not just that your book sells well, but that people get a lot out of it and that it has an impact in their lives. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Thank you, David. It was such a treat to talk to you today.
Thanks, Jada.
Thank you so much for your heart and attention and listening to Lead with Love. You can always get the links and resources mentioned in each episode over at leadwithlovepodcast.com so that you can build a sustainable business and live a creative life on your terms. If this message, Leading with Love, resonates with you and you want to take a stand for remembering that there are humans with beating hearts behind the numbers, I would love for you to subscribe so you never miss an episode and leave an honest review. It would mean the world to me, and it also helps more people spread more love in the world, which we really, really need. I also love hearing from you. So as you're listening, take a screenshot, share your favorite takeaway, and tag me on Instagram and Facebook at Jada Selner. I really appreciate you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.